Here's a slightly uncomfortable truth. It's very possible that your history teachers weren't trying to lie to you. They were just telling you the easiest version to remember. History in school often feels more like a movie trailer than the full film. Short, neat, clear heroes, clear climaxes, and very few details that make your head hurt. The problem is when a story gets told long enough and repeated often enough, it starts to feel like absolute truth. This series isn't here to overthrow history or act smarter than everyone else. It does one simple thing. It takes the things everyone believes and asks one very small question. Wait, are we sure that's actually how it happened? Story 1. Newton and the Apple. Everyone knows this story. Isaac Newton is sitting under a tree thinking about life, and then boom, an apple falls straight onto his head. At that exact moment, gravity is born. Human history changes forever, and physics teachers get a story they can reuse for generations. Clean, satisfying, very cinematic, and almost completely wrong. The truth is, no apple ever bonked Newton on the head. No dramatic thud, no divine spotlight like the universe just picked him as the main character. He simply saw an apple fall while he was inside the house and started thinking about it. Then kept thinking. For a long time, the kind of thinking that makes neighbors wonder why this guy keeps staring out the window and writing things down all day. There was no 5-second genius awakening, just years of sitting alone doing math and a level of patience that's honestly terrifying. But that version is boring. People prefer believing genius comes from luck. Because if genius comes from discipline and 20 years of hard work, yeah, that sounds exhausting. Story 2. Sherlock Holmes never said elementary, my dear Watson. When people think of Sherlock Holmes, almost everyone pictures the exact same guy. A genius detective, deerstalker hat, pipe in his mouth, one glance at the crime scene, then a cool, effortless line. Elementary, my dear Watson. The quote feels so familiar that if Holmes doesn't say it, something feels off. Here's the problem. He never said it, not once. In all the original stories, Holmes does say elementary, and he does often call Watson my dear Watson, but those two parts were never combined into one sentence. That legendary line was stitched together later by stage plays, movies, and TV shows, where everything needs to be short, stylish, and easy to remember. Then, pop culture took it from there. The line got repeated enough times for long enough that our brains just auto-filled it into memory. This is the Mandela effect in literature. A sentence that never existed, but somehow the entire world swears they've heard it before. Story 3. People in the Middle Ages didn't believe the Earth was flat. When people hear the Middle Ages, they instantly imagine a long era of ignorance, an age where people were scared of sailing too far because they thought they'd fall off the edge of the Earth. This image shows up everywhere: movies, textbooks, history memes. Sounds convincing, and it's also very wrong. In reality, educated people in the Middle Ages knew perfectly well that the Earth was spherical. They read ancient Greek texts, understood basic astronomy, and some even calculated Earth's circumference with surprising accuracy. Nobody was standing on a dock yelling that ships would fall into the void. Even Christopher Columbus wasn't opposed because he believed the Earth was round. He was opposed because his math was terrible. Scholars argued that the distance to Asia was much larger than Columbus claimed, and they were right. But that version isn't heroic enough, so history got a rewrite. Columbus became the lone genius, bravely defying a world of ignorant people. A better story, just not a more accurate one. Story 4. Ancient Greek statues were actually painted in bright colors. When people think of ancient Greece, most of us picture pure white statues. Silent, elegant, refined, intellectual looking, like an entire civilization collectively agreed that white was the only acceptable color palette. Very classy, very minimalist, and completely wrong. In reality, those statues were once painted in loud, vivid colors. Red, blue, yellow. Some even had makeup on the eyes and lips. Archaeologists have found microscopic traces of pigment still clinging to the stone. The problem is time. Thousands of years of sun, rain, and weather peeled all that color away, leaving behind the bare white stone. When Renaissance artists later discovered these statues, they assumed the white look was intentional, so they copied it. And just like that, a massive archaeological misunderstanding turned into a brand new beauty standard for Western art. The Greeks weren't trying to be subtle, they were trying to stand out. Story 5. The Great Wall of China can't be seen from space. There's a fact a lot of Americans learned in school. The Great Wall of China is the only man-made structure visible from space. Sounds epic, very humanity proud, perfect for a test question. There's just one tiny problem: it's not true. From a physics standpoint, that idea is basically impossible. Yes, the wall is long, but it's also extremely narrow and roughly the same color as the land around it. The human eye can't pick it out from that distance, even from Earth's orbit, let alone from the moon. This story actually dates back to the 1930s when humans hadn't even been to space yet. It started as exaggeration, a poetic way to describe how massive the wall is, and then got repeated so many times it quietly graduated into fact. If you need a visual, try spotting a gray rope lying across a desert from an airplane window. Good luck. Story 6. The Titanic was never called unsinkable. The Titanic has long been the perfect symbol of human arrogance. A massive, luxurious ship said to challenge the ocean itself, only to be instantly humbled by nature. The story gets even better when people add one detail: that the owners confidently declared this ship is unsinkable. Sounds satisfying, very dramatic, perfect for a movie, but unfortunately, it's not true. In the official promotional materials, the company never used the word unsinkable. They said the ship was practically unsinkable, which is classic marketing and lawyer language. Like when a watch is advertised as water-resistant, not this thing will never get wet ever. The press is the one that quietly removed the words practically, because almost doesn't make for a great headline, and just like that, a misunderstanding was born. The lesson here is very simple: sensational media always beats the truth, because the truth is usually not dramatic enough. Story 7. Nero didn't play music while Rome burned. If you've ever watched a historical movie, you've seen this scene. Rome is drowning in flames, and Emperor Nero stands on a balcony, calmly playing music like he's watching fireworks. It's the perfect image of an irresponsible ruler. Very hate-able, very cinematic, and very wrong. First of all, the instrument people love to mention is a violin. Small problem: the violin hadn't even been invented yet. If Nero played anything at all, it would have been some other string instrument, and honestly, way less dramatic. More importantly, Nero wasn't even in Rome when the fire started. Historians say he was dozens of miles away. When he heard the news, he rushed back to the city, organized relief efforts, and even used his own money to help people who had lost their homes. The image of Nero playing music was actually political propaganda spread by his enemies. Repeat a story long enough, and eventually history just shrugs and calls it truth. Story 8. The 300 Spartans didn't fight alone. The Hollywood version tells us that only 300 Spartans stood in the way of the entire Persian Empire, like they walked out of the gym, rubbed on some olive oil, looked at each other and said, "All right, today we do something stupid but legendary." Very Oscar-coded, also very inaccurate. In reality, the Battle of Thermopylae looked more like a Greek group project than a solo hero moment. Alongside the Spartans led by Leonidas, there were thousands of allies from other Greek city-states. They fought, they bled, they died. The only difference, they didn't get slow-motion shots and nobody printed their names on t-shirts. So why did the story get simplified? Because Hollywood is allergic to spreadsheets. A small group facing a massive enemy is way easier to sell than explaining who showed up from where and why they also deserve credit. History likes facts. Hollywood likes lone heroes. And the audience usually remembers the guy in the middle of the poster, not the entire team who did the group assignment. Story 9. People in the Middle Ages didn't all die at 30. You've probably heard this one before. In the Middle Ages, the average lifespan was 30 years. Cue collective panic, like wait. So if you hit 29, are you already drafting a will? The number is shocking and also wildly misleading. The issue is statistics. Infant mortality back then was brutal, so the data gets dragged down hard like a group average when one guy didn't show up for the exam. A lot of children didn't survive their early years, which makes the average lifespan look way worse than reality. But if you made it past childhood, congrats! You just unlocked the long life DLC. Adults in the Middle Ages could absolutely live into their 50s, 60s, and yes, even their 70s. People weren't just collapsing at 30 in plague-filled alleyways like movies love to suggest. In other words, average lifespan 30 is like rating a restaurant 1 star because the parking lot sucks. Statistics don't lie, but if you don't know how to read them, they love messing with you. Story 10. There are no alligators in the New York sewers. New York has a classic urban legend. Deep under New York City, in those dark, creepy sewer tunnels, there are giant alligators swimming around like they pay rent. Honestly, it fits the city's vibe. Rats the size of cats, pizza at 3 a.m., and of course alligators in the sewers. The story goes back decades. People claimed New Yorkers used to buy baby alligators as fun pets, then quickly realized an alligator doesn't vibe with a studio apartment bathtub. So they allegedly did the unthinkable and flushed them. Hollywood and the media heard this and said, "Perfect, don't fact check, print it." Biology, unfortunately, is less fun. Alligators need warm temperatures, sunlight, and a stable food supply. New York sewers are cold, dark, and smell like something that would make any animal rethink its life choices. So why does the legend survive? Because people love fear, especially convenient fear. It makes the city feel more dangerous, more exciting, and at parties it always gets someone to gasp, "Wait, seriously? No alligators down there." But if believing it makes your subway ride more thrilling, hey, nobody's stopping you. Story 11. Mozart doesn't make babies smarter. For a while, parents everywhere believed this magical idea: just play Wolfgang Amadeus Mozart for your baby and their intelligence will auto-update. No educational toys, no talking, just a Bluetooth speaker and a classical playlist. And if your kid didn't turn into a genius, clearly you played the wrong symphony. The parental anxiety was very real. If I don't do this early enough, my kid is already behind at the starting line. So parents everywhere panicked, terrified they were raising their child incorrectly just because they forgot to press play at 7 p.m. Here's the actual science. The original research only showed that adults performed slightly better on tasks right after listening to music, an effect that lasted about as long as a cup of coffee. It didn't turn babies into Einstein. It didn't add extra RAM to the brain. Marketing, of course, heard this and said, "Fantastic. Slap scientifically proven on everything. CDs, toys, apps, all promising genius as long as you keep swiping your card." Music is great, but raising a child isn't a 10-minute magic trick. And if Mozart really created geniuses, he probably would have listened to himself straight from the crib. Story 12. Absinthe doesn't cause hallucinations. Absinthe has this legendary reputation, a bright green liquor nicknamed the Green Fairy. Drink it, and suddenly you're seeing visions. Walls start talking, and artistic inspiration pops up like an unzippable ad. Very poetic, very Paris, and very exaggerated. The chemistry is way less romantic. Absinthe is just alcohol, very strong alcohol, and it doesn't contain anything at a high enough dose to cause hallucinations like people claim. The usual suspect was Trojan, but the amount in traditional absinthe is so low, your brain stays clearer than your bank account after closing the tab. So why did the bad reputation spread so fast? Classic smear campaign. When absinthe got popular, the wine industry looked over and thought, people are drinking something else. Suddenly stories about madness and insanity started getting pushed. Convenient, effective, and humans. Humans love blaming drinks. Drink too much, do something dumb. Wake up the next day and say, "It wasn't me, it was the Green Fairy." There was no fairy, just strong alcohol, bad decisions, and a story that sounds way better than the truth. Story 13. Cowboys weren't all white men. Movies make you believe the Wild West was basically a private meeting. All white men, wide brim hats, faces permanently squinting like they just argued with the sun. Anyone else showing up feels like wrong movie. Very neat, very Hollywood, and very wrong. In reality, the West was way more diverse. There were cowboys of Mexican descent, black cowboys, Native Americans, and plenty of mixed backgrounds. They rode horses, herded cattle, carried guns, did literally everything a cowboy does. The only difference, they didn't get to stand in the center of the frame long enough for audiences to remember their names. The influence from Mexico was so strong that many things we now think of as very American were actually borrowed ideas from riding techniques to that iconic cowboy hat. So why don't you see this in movies? Because Hollywood doesn't love inconvenient history. Diversity is harder to explain. A single stereotype is much easier to sell tickets. The real Wild West had more people than you think. The poster just didn't have room for everyone. Story 14. People in the Middle Ages actually loved bathing. When people think about the Middle Ages, they immediately imagine a world that smells. Like an entire society collectively decided soap was optional and everyone looked like they'd been camping for 3 straight weeks. This dirty stereotype is so strong that if someone says they lived in medieval times, your instinctive reaction is to hold your breath. The truth is surprisingly different. People in the Middle Ages loved bathing. In many European cities, public bathhouses were as lively as coffee shops today. People didn't just go there to get clean, they went to chat, relax, and catch up on neighborhood drama. Basically Facebook before there were faces. So when did people start bathing less ironically later? When plagues spread, people believed hot water opened the pores and let disease sneak in. The solution? Avoid bathing to stay safe. Completely wrong, but at the time it made perfect sense. The lesson here is simple. Modern doesn't always mean clean. Sometimes people in the past were cleaner than we are, at least in what they believed. Story 15. The Wild West actually had strict gun control. Cowboy movies teach us that the Old West was basically a party with no security. Everyone carried a gun. Everyone could pull it out whenever they felt like it. And even a small argument somehow ended in a dramatic duel at sunset. Very intense, very masculine, and very legally inaccurate. In reality, many Western towns had surprisingly strict gun laws. In places like Dodge City, visitors were often required to hand over their guns to the sheriff or the hotel owner when entering town. Carrying weapons around busy streets was considered a terrible idea, the kind of terrible that got you meeting the police way faster than meeting the bartender. Why ban guns? Because towns wanted peace. People needed to trade drink and make it home in one piece, not collect bullet holes as proof of personal freedom. The image of everyone armed at all times is mostly a modern invention. Color graded in sepia for the right aesthetic. The real Wild West wasn't as chaotic as the movies, the rules just weren't cool enough to make it onto a poster. Story 16. General Tso's chicken isn't a traditional Chinese dish. General Tso's chicken is so familiar that a lot of people assume it's ancient. Passed down through dynasties, possibly invented during some glorious military campaign. You take a bite and subconsciously think, yeah, the Qing dynasty probably loved this. But the truth is, not really. This dish was born in the United States, perfected in Chinese restaurants serving American customers, and became especially popular in New York City. It's sweeter, crispier, bolder. In other words, it was tuned for local taste buds, not for an imperial palace in Beijing. This is immigrant cuisine at work. When people cook in a new country, they adapt. They use what's available, they adjust flavors to what customers enjoy. Over time, that adapted version becomes the tradition. So sometimes traditional food doesn't come from centuries of history, it comes from enough people eating the same thing for long enough and collectively deciding, yeah, this feels ancient. Story 17. The mummy's curse was basically a newspaper sales trick. Anytime an ancient tomb gets opened, movies immediately flip into drama mode. The door creaks open, cold wind blows for no reason, and someone whispers, the curse has begun. Especially after the tomb of Tutankhamun was discovered, the press completely lost its chill. Someone sneezes clearly, the next victim. In reality, the media seasoned this story harder than fast food fries. A few coincidental deaths, plus some extremely creative imagination, and boom, a full-blown mummy's curse perfectly packaged to sell newspapers. When you actually look at the data, most people involved in the excavation lived long, healthy lives and died from very normal reasons. No lightning strikes, no ghosts, no spooky background music. But humans love mystery. A curse is way more interesting than a headline that says archaeologists live peacefully and pay their taxes. In Egypt, the real danger was never the mummies. It was our imagination going completely off the rails. Story 18. William Tell may have never existed. William Tell is the kind of hero everyone nods along to. A regular father, an apple balanced on his son's head. One perfectly accurate shot, so accurate it would probably shut down every archery class immediately. A national legend of Switzerland. Cool, inspiring, and very likely imaginary. The tiny problem here is evidence. There isn't any. No contemporary documents, no clear historical records. William Tell shows up on paper pretty late, like a character debuting after the fanbase was already emotionally invested. And it gets better. The story feels oddly familiar. Historians noticed it closely resembles several other European folk tales. A skilled archer, a child, an object placed on the head, and an unspoken rule that says miss the shot and it's over. Same plot, different name, different address. So why does a whole country still love this story? Because everyone needs symbols. Truth is messy. Legends are clean memorable and look great in textbooks. William Tell may never have existed, but the story about him still alive and hitting emotional bullseyes every time. Story 19. The Iron Maiden was basically a museum prop. Whenever medieval torture comes up, your brain immediately loads the same image. The Iron Maiden, a metal cabinet packed with spikes, close the door and, yeah, game over, terrifying, traumatizing, and conveniently featured in every movie that wants the audience gripping their seat. It looks like something the Middle Ages ordered in bulk. Here's the problem. There's no solid evidence it was actually used back then. No reliable records, no contemporary descriptions, no medieval diary entry saying, got locked in the spike cabinet today. Experience 2/10, would not recommend. Most Iron Maidens you see today were made much later, mostly for display purposes. And museums understand one simple truth: the scarier the history looks, the better the tickets sell. A sword is fine, a spiked metal closet, kids immediately drag their parents over. So the Iron Maiden is less a real torture device and more a stage prop. It exists not to torture people, but to torture the imagination of museum visitors. Sometimes history isn't just retold, it's carefully staged under the right lighting. Story 20. The Trojan horse might have been a metaphor. Everyone knows the classic version. The Greeks leave behind a giant wooden horse. The people of Troy see it and go, free gift, love that. They drag it inside the city, celebrate, fall asleep, and wake up to dramatic music and a history textbook moment. But there's a less cinematic possibility. The horse may have been a metaphor. Many scholars think it could have been a poetic way to describe a military tactic, a siege engine, or simply a very clever trick that got retold with extra flair. Less epic, sure, but more believable than an entire city ignoring every survival instinct at once. So why did the wooden horse version win? Because humans love drama. Metaphors are hard to remember. A giant horse you can picture immediately, especially when it's tied to the fall of Troy that sticks forever. Simple takeaway here. If your enemy leaves a gift right outside your front gate, maybe don't drag it inside immediately. Ask a few questions first. Story 21. The Illuminati isn't a world-controlling society. The internet loves the idea that the Illuminati control everything. Politics, music, the weather, and somehow the exact reason your Wi-Fi dies the moment you really need it. It's comforting, honestly, because if someone is secretly in charge, then at least the chaos has management. Here's the reality check. The real Illuminati, formerly known as the Bavarian Illuminati, was just a group of intellectuals in the 18th century. They liked reason, education, and pushing back against superstition. In other words, more slightly edgy book club than global control room. And how did this so-called shadow empire end quickly? It got banned, disbanded, gone within a few years. No satellites, no pyramids, no secret playlists. So why do conspiracy theories refuse to die? Because people really want to believe someone is steering the ship. The truth is messier, the world is chaotic, there is no central control room, and no one is competent enough to run everything anyway. Less exciting, sure, but also way more accurate. Story 22. The Priory of Sion was a 20th century hoax. Thanks to novels and movies, the Priory of Sion got a serious upgrade. An ancient secret society, guarding truths that could change humanity itself. Codes, sacred bloodlines, hidden rooms that definitely don't have Wi-Fi. Sounds incredible. There's just one issue: reality is way less epic. Most of the so-called evidence came from forged documents, papers, quietly planted in libraries to look like history, casually dropped them there. The man behind the curtain was Pierre Plantard, a guy with a powerful imagination and an impressive amount of free time. He invented a myth, then sat back and watched it grow legs. So why did the story survive? Because lies only need believers. Once enough people buy in, the lie gets books, movies, and fans arguing about it very seriously online. Here's the simple takeaway. If a secret society really controlled the world, they probably wouldn't reveal all their secrets in a best-selling paperback. Story 23. Cleopatra wasn't Hollywood beautiful. When people hear Cleopatra, their brains instantly switch to Hollywood mode. Elizabeth Taylor? Winged eyeliner sharp enough to cut glass. A stare so powerful the Roman Empire forgets to file taxes. This version is so familiar that everyone just assumes, yeah, that's probably accurate. Then you look at ancient coins, and reality shows up unfiltered. Cleopatra looks pretty normal. Strong nose, defined chin, no influencer vibes whatsoever, no beauty filter, no dramatic lighting, just a face meant for currency, which is where history tends to be more honest than cinema. What actually made Cleopatra dangerous wasn't her looks, it was her brain. She spoke multiple languages, understood power, and knew exactly how to work the most powerful men of her time. Short version, she didn't need to be beautiful to be lethal. So why did her image get simplified? Because society loves turning powerful women into appearances. Calling her brilliant is complicated. Calling her beautiful sells tickets. Cleopatra didn't need Hollywood standards. Hollywood needed her. Story 24. Baseball wasn't a purely American invention. The patriotic version says baseball was born alongside apple pie and fireworks, a sport that is completely unquestionably made in the United States. Sounds proud, perfect for opening day speeches, and also heavily simplified. The reality is more European. Before baseball became an American icon, it had relatives overseas. In England, games like rounders and early forms of cricket were already doing the whole hit ball run fast, don't get out thing. Americans didn't invent baseball from scratch, they remixed it, tweaked the rules, sped it up, and turned it into entertainment. So why does the story get Americanized? Because every country loves a clean origin myth. Saying we perfected an existing idea doesn't hit as hard as we created this. Myths build identity, sell jerseys, and make the game feel bigger than just 9 people and a ball. Baseball is still very American, it just has a passport with more stamps than you were taught. Story 25. Diamonds aren't rare and they're not forever. Modern engagement culture makes diamonds feel like cosmic material, rare, eternal, and apparently if you don't have one, your love is under review. You kneel, open the ring box, lights hit the stone. Everyone silently agrees this emotion has now been officially certified. Here's the less romantic part. Diamonds aren't rare. There are a lot of them. So many that if they all hit the market at once, prices would drop faster than an old phone battery at 20%. What keeps diamonds expensive isn't nature, it's market control, most famously by De Beers. Control supply, control the story. The rest is emotional advertising. A diamond is forever sounds way better than this rock is durable, but your relationship still requires effort. So love got packaged in velvet boxes with an unspoken message. If you really care, your credit card will understand. Diamonds are still pretty, no argument there. But real forever isn't inside the stone, it's in how two people treat each other long after the ring box has been closed. Story 26. Lemmings don't commit mass suicide. For years, the world believed lemmings were collectively depressed. Every season, the whole group supposedly ran straight off a cliff like they just finished a meeting and agreed, "All right, everyone jump, let's keep it efficient." The image became so famous that nobody questioned it. Nature, right? So where did this idea come from? A nature documentary by Disney. Tiny problem though, the famous mass suicide scene was staged, the cameras needed shock value, so the lemmings were pushed, angles were chosen. Carefully, dramatic music kicked in, and suddenly nature delivered an Oscar-worthy performance. Actual biology is way less dramatic. Lemmings migrate when populations get too large, they look for new food sources, and sometimes they just get lost. No philosophy of despair, no group decision, just a really bad day at work. The scary part is how long a fake image can survive. And the bigger lesson, authority doesn't guarantee truth. Even when the narrator's voice sounds calm and trustworthy, nature can still be directed. Story 27. A Message to Garcia was basically a made-up story to push obedience. In hustle culture, silent hard work gets treated like a sacred commandment, and the go-to symbol is a message to Garcia. The story praises a soldier who receives an assignment and just goes. No questions, no emails, no deadlines, no "can you clarify the scope" clean, efficient, and extremely convenient for bosses. Here's the problem. The story was made up. The author Elbert Hubbard wasn't writing history. He was writing motivational propaganda, the kind that makes you feel guilty for ever asking the question why. The real purpose: encourage workers not to question instructions, just do it. Fast, quietly, sounds productive. But in real life, most tasks aren't that clear and just go off and turns into going in the wrong direction. When work ethic gets manipulated, hard work turns into silent suffering. Working well is great, but asking for clarity is also a skill. Not everyone should be sprinting off to deliver a message without a map, especially when the person giving the task is standing right next to Google Maps. Story 28. St. Patrick didn't drive snakes out of Ireland. The classic religious story goes like this. St. Patrick stands on a hill, raises his hand, and boom, all the snakes flee Ireland. No more snakes, clean land. Perfect legend for parades, green outfits, and suspiciously green beer. There's just one tiny issue. Ireland never had snakes to begin with. Biology is ruthless like that. After the Ice Age, snakes never made it there. No snakes means nothing to chase away. St. Patrick didn't need miracles. He just needed prehistoric Google Maps. So what were the snakes then? Many scholars think it was symbolic, a metaphor for pagan beliefs or old religions. Saying he gradually changed belief systems over time is accurate but boring. Saying he drove out snakes way more cinematic. And that's how legends replace reality. Humans love strong visuals. A clear miracle sticks better than a long theological explanation. St. Patrick is still important. Just know that his most famous achievement had absolutely nothing to do with reptiles. Story 29. The Spanish Inquisition wasn't like the movies. The moment you hear the Spanish Inquisition, your brain instantly switches to horror mode. Dark dungeons, black robes, torture scheduled like weekly episodes. The reputation is terrifying. The vibe feels like a movie you didn't buy a ticket for, but somehow still got dragged into. The reality is less cinematic. A lot of the nightmare imagery came from political propaganda pushed by its enemies, basically an early, very aggressive smear campaign. Compared to secular courts of the same era, the Spanish Inquisition often kept more detailed records, followed more formal procedures, and this part surprises people was sometimes less arbitrary. Not saints, but also not full-time movie villains. So why did the terrifying image stick? Because history loves drama. A dark story sells better than a spreadsheet of legal procedures. And once an image is strong enough, it refuses to leave even when the truth is way more complicated. The Spanish Inquisition did commit real wrongs. That part matters. It's just that movies added the soundtrack, cranked up the contrast, and quietly ignored the fine print. Story 30. Ancient traditions are often modern inventions. A surprising number of things marketed as ancient are actually fresh out of the factory. Traditional outfits, grand rituals, even some 1,000-year family recipes showed up around the same time as color printers. But saying we came up with this last year doesn't sell. Saying our ancestors have done this forever, wallets open on instinct. There are countless cultural examples labeled as ancient simply because it sounds classy. When marketing invents a past, the present suddenly feels deeper, like slapping a sepia filter on a photo taken yesterday. Why do people believe it? Because the past feels safe. If our grandparents did it, it must be right. And just like that, tradition becomes the perfect sales tool. No proof required, just a good story. Small takeaway here, tradition isn't bad, but before you bow respectfully, maybe check the label. See where it was manufactured. Real history is valuable. History built to sell things. Yeah, read the fine print. Story 31. Why the history you learned is often wrong. Here's the slightly uncomfortable truth. The history you learned in school isn't completely false, it's just the easiest version to swallow. Real history is long, messy, full of footnotes, and absolutely not designed for a 45-minute test. So it gets trimmed, simplified, polished, and in the process, it quietly creates familiar distortions, one lone hero, one single cause, one clean, satisfying ending. The problem isn't just missing details, it's who writes history and why. Winners write textbooks, governments need stable stories, media loves drama, marketing needs emotion. Everyone adds a little seasoning, and before you know it, the original truth doesn't recognize itself anymore. History isn't a math problem with one correct answer. It's more like a massive case file, and you were only handed the cover page. Understanding that doesn't make you distrust everything. It helps you ask better questions. And sometimes asking the right question is the most important history lesson of all. If you've made it this far, you've probably noticed one thing: history isn't boring, it's just usually told way too neatly. So here's the question for you: out of the 31 stories you just heard, which one surprised you the most? Or is there a historical fact you believed for years only to one day realize, wait, who even told me that? Drop a comment and share your thoughts. Not to argue about who's right or wrong, but to keep asking better questions. Because history doesn't live in textbooks. It lives in how we think, how we doubt, and how we retell what happened.